they need a way to give the go-ahead to use actual violence against people who aren't using actual violence.
July 5th, 2020, the Barney and Clyde Show, episode 13, season 2. Segment 1, How Free is America in July 2020? We'll look at the whole silence equals violence thrust and the climate activist who got canceled by Forbes after it ceased to matter, the coronavirus lockdowns and reopening reversals, Father Ted Rothrock getting canceled in Carmel. Under They Really Said That, we're going to look at the very stable genius, Donald Trump, and some recent things he's done that make you wonder whether he does the trolling or whether he's getting trolled. Also, I got some observations on last evening's White House speech. Under Maybe Someday We'll Try a Free Market, we'll look at how Washington Post writer Tracy Jan it flabbergasts her that Minneapolis still has so much inequity after a half century of increasingly progressive policies. And under Don't Start Me to Talkin, we'll talk about Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest, which she's sitting on a treasure trove of information, and the next few days and weeks are going to be interesting. All right, Clyde, how you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
All right, I'm Barney Quick, and Clyde here is our co-host.
Yeah, it was nice to be back at the digital libation station. We normally meet at Barney's Bar, and that's the real libation station. We meet over drinks and talk about the weighty matters of the day from a conservative perspective like Barney has and a libertarian perspective like I have, and often we have an overlap in our Venn diagram, and sometimes we have some divergence, but in any case, it's always a riveting conversation.
And if we meet toward evening, we sometimes have something kind of spirituous, a cocktail or a beer or something like that. If it's the middle of the day, we generally do something a little more non-spirituous.
Yeah.
What do you got? What are you drinking today, Clyde?
Well, I've actually got trifecta here. I've got some water for one, but I've got this stuff I picked up at the Mexican grocery store. It's called De Mi País, which I think means of my country. It's coconut milk drink with nata de coco, and it's mango flavored, so it's mango coconut. I haven't tried it. It's got little floaty bits in it. I'm not sure if the floaty bits are like boba type things or if they're fruit or what they are, but I've got that, and I'm also having some coffee. So I found some Cafe Bustelo, which we've had on the show before. I think it's probably backwards in the camera, but good old Cafe Bustelo. I finally found some cups or some pods that go into my Nespresso machine. So it's sort of like a Keurig machine for espresso, but the pods cost like 70 cents to $1.25 each, so it's pretty expensive even to have it in your house. But these are about $0.25 each. The espresso is pretty decent. It's not great, but it's pretty good for $0.25 each. I think it's a win. But we'll see how this crazy coconut stuff is too.
Yeah.
What are you tugging on today?
I am about to open a bottle of Coca-Cola.
Oh.
Not cherry Coca-Cola or Diet Coca-Cola or anything. The good old Coca-Cola. For two reasons. One, I'm not a big soda pop guy. I never have been. But once in a while, if it's sweltering hot out like it is right now, I find a good old Coca-Cola about as refreshing as you can get.
You know, I don't drink pop. I drink soda so rarely that when I do, just a few ounces of cola tastes amazing.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's an American cultural icon. I mean, it's one of those instantly recognizable icons of American pop culture, like Elvis Presley or baseball, or blue jeans or hamburger sandwiches or something. All over the world,
all the stuff you'd want to smuggle into the Soviet Union in the 80s.
Yeah, or North Korea or something. And it's got an interesting history. Dr. John Pemberton, the Georgia pharmacist, who bless his heart, he incurred an injury. He served on the Confederate side in the Civil War, but he incurred an injury in one of the very last battles of the Civil War that got a nasty slice from a saber, which left him, he wound up becoming a morphine addict.
Oh.
And he was trying his best to find a cure for morphine addiction. And he came up with a drink called French wine cola, which was his variation on a French drink called Vin Mariani. He was messing with the Damiana, which is a shrub that grows. Oh, you know about Damiana?
Yeah.
A shrub native to southern Texas and Central America, and then he some flower, I can't remember what he started looking at, but he began experimenting with the coca plant and the cola nut, and he came up with this French wine coca, and then Fulton County, where Atlanta is located in the post-war years, went dry, and they instituted prohibition.
Fascinating.
So he needed to get rid of the alcohol. It still had cocaine in it, but
it had cocaine in it at the time. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, and there were already some carbonated cure-all elixir type beverages on the market. As a matter of fact, Dr. Pepper predates Coca-Cola by a couple of years. It got going in 1885.
Right. And that the snake oil sort of situation is where they get
the
their...
guys that had come into the town square and hawk their cure-all elixir and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that the original Coca-Cola recipe would taste very medicinal to people today.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, he was originally touting it as a valuable brain tonic that would cure headaches, relieve exhaustion, and calm nerves. One of his business associates was a guy named Frank Robinson, who's the guy who came up with the Spencerian script that is still used today. The logo that Frank Robinson came up with in 1887.
Fascinating.
He needed his cocaine addiction, or his morphine addiction rather, was draining his finances badly. So he sold out to another Atlanta pharmacist named Asa Candler in 1888, and he died of stomach cancer just a few months later. And so his own story is kind of sad, but he founded a great American cultural institution, and it's a delicious beverage. Good old Coca-Cola. So
I also remember in the fascinating American novel To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh yeah,
by Harper Lee. There was a town drunk. I'm trying to look it up on my phone. What the character's name was, I forget. Mr. Raymond tells. He's the town drunk. He's always got his brown paper bag, and then he's always tooting out of it. And the kids figure out that he's drinking Coca-Cola. Actually, he's not actually a drunk. He's just keeping up these appearances. And I don't remember what the justification was. But yeah, he was trolling.
It was a big put on.
Exactly.
So to gather information. Yeah. Okay. So. Welcome back to Libation Station, everybody. Let's dive into this. How free do you see the United States of America as being in July 2020 compared to July 2019, compared to when you were 10 years old, compared to what you've read about the 1950s or the 1920s or whatever?
I think you have to define freedom first. We have a very different kind of freedom in 2020 than we had in 2019. We also have a very different kind of freedom in 2020 than we had in 1920 or 1820.
That's
because
true.
We have more abilities at our disposal in 2020.
A wider array of options as to how to live. Yeah.
That's right. So in 1820, you were relatively free to travel about the Western world. But the means to do so was so drastic that almost no one could. And in 2019, international travel is certainly not something that's approachable for everyone, but most people could afford an international flight if they really put their elbow grease into it and saved up for it. It could happen.
Yeah.
People are pretty free to travel about. But, coronavirus and other factors have really made a big impact on your freedom to move about the country and the world. So compared to the state of freedom that I'm accustomed to living in, I would say that we're less free than we were. I would say that we're kind of at the precipice of a slippery slope of losing some core freedoms permanently.
I have to concur. I don't know if you're thinking of the same freedoms I am or not. As you told the viewers at the outset, you come at it as a conservative or a libertarian, and I come at it as a conservative. So we might be thinking of some of the same freedom losses.
Mm-hmm.
We might each have our own. I'm looking at the Merriam-Webster definition of freedom, and there's several. One is the absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action. The quality or state of being exempt from or released from something, usually from something onerous. Liberation from slavery or restraint from the power of another.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have the Google definition here, or series of them here, and it's pretty close. My favorite is the first one: the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. Mm-hmm. And then there's two sub definitions. One, the absence of subjugation to foreign domination or despotic government. Or two, the state of not being imprisoned or enslaved.
Okay.
But I think that you, as a Madisonian conservative, and myself as sort of a mostly Rothbardian libertarian, would probably define freedom as, building on one of those definitions, as the one's power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint, as long as that power is not exerted with the purpose of initiating force against person or property, or to defraud another person, and maybe to negligently injure person or property. Is that fair?
Sure, I'd buy into that. I'd go
Okay.
along with that. Well, how are we less? Give me some specifics. Where do you see us being less free?
Well, for example, on our local front here in the great city of Indianapolis, which I have a wonderful affinity to. I just love the city of Indianapolis so much. They've just started a mandatory face mask law. I don't want to call it a law.
Edict. I think
edict. It's more of an edict. So they're going to give without a vote. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think that this is something that the city council got together and voted on. I think this is just a decree that was made from the mayor's office. Am I wrong about that?
No, I believe you're right.
Okay, I will double check that and make sure that I make that correction if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's the case. But so you have to be in a face covering while outside of your home in the city of Indianapolis. I think that is a huge infringement on one's personal liberty. We talked about your personal liberty sort of ending as you injure or negligently impact other people. And I can see the face mask argument being made that you might be negligently injuring other people without it. But just to be outside of your home, out of doors, not wearing a face covering, if there aren't other people around, if you're doing proper social distancing, if you're just walking along the bicycle path or the footpath, the Monon Trail, if you're familiar with the Indy area, with no one around you or no one close enough to you to matter, then I don't think that you should have to wear the damn thing. And further, I think that if we believe the CDC and the World Health Organization on one day versus another, sometimes they say masks work, sometimes they say they don't work, and it's clear that they work if you use them properly, and that they have negative returns if you don't wash them, if you're constantly messing with your face and touching it, and you're touching surfaces with your hands, and then you're touching your mask and your nose and your mouth. So both of those things are true. Using it and not using it, depending on how you use it, can both be negligent and damaging. So I think it's a restriction on personal liberty to be able to make a good choice?
When you touched on something, the fact that this was not voted on, heavy-handedness all the way up to its most extreme form, which is tyranny, has an infantilizing effect on people. You deprive them of their agency, and they start to become docile. They start to not even be able to figure things out for themselves because that's taken care of for them.
Right.
And that's what happens to people in real draconian dictatorships like North Korea.
Yeah. You accept it as the new normal, and look at what our new normal looks like now and how quickly people started to accept it.
Yeah. It deprives the human being of the development of a very important quality, judgment. Should I wear a mask or not? Well, let's look at the pros and cons. Let's look at the extenuating circumstances, all that kind of stuff. If that whole set of considerations is taken out of your hands, it kind of chips away at your basic humanity. You're what you are supposed to be about as a fully developed human being.
And it's sort of anti-science too, because how does the city of Indianapolis know, or how does Mayor Hogsett know that more people than not use the mask properly? Mm-hmm. If they don't know that, if they haven't been able to scientifically sample the population, and I know that you do those surveys and samples, and then you extrapolate from there, and that there's things that can go wrong in that data collection. It's not always perfectly precise, but unless they have a scientific way of applying to know whether or not more people are going to use the mask in the safe and proper method that causes it to do what we're wanting it to do properly, and that's protect people from taking in the droplets of saliva from other people. If they can't prove that, then how do they know they're not making it worse by making people who aren't going to use it properly wear the mask that they're going to touch, all the time and pull away from their face and make things worse? They don't know that.
I know. Okay. I think we ought to talk about some other areas where we might consider that we're not as free as we once were. This whole silence equals violence business. I just personally bristle at that. The basic question that has to be dealt with to talk about silence equals violence is there systemic racism and or bigotry, and to what extent? A guy we talk about a lot on this show because we both admire him, Larry Elder, says that systemic bigotry is no longer the central issue facing Black America. Mm-hmm. The fatherless family is far more important.
Well, let's just preface for people that don't know who Larry Elder is. Larry Elder's a Black conservative, and he hates the term African American. So I would normally say African American, but he hates the term. So out of respect for him, I won't say it. He's a Black conservative, and I think he's a former attorney, is where his credentials come from.
Yeah, he's got a law degree, and I think he was a corporate recruiter at one point or something, and then he became a radio announcer and a columnist and so forth. Mm-hmm. But no sooner do you say that and use him as your substantiation than you wouldn't believe you better believe there's systemic bigotry and racism, and every Black father has to have the talk with his son about what to do if you're pulled over by police and blah blah blah, and of course those two yahoos down in Georgia that shot that guy that was jogging and stopped to look at a house under construction or something, and those kinds of situations.
Well, those kind of situations, I was having a Facebook interaction like you do with somebody not too long ago, and they were giving me all these examples of the systemic racism and all these particular, anecdotal examples. all these anecdotal examples, and he was telling me you have to take a deep dive, and then he gave me a whole bunch of anecdotes. I'm like, that's not a deep dive. Those are hand-picked examples. In order to take a deep dive, you have to look at data, and then you have to examine whether your data is good or not.
There was an interesting piece written in 2018 at the Atlantic by John McWhorter. Do you know who he is?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think from you mostly.
Okay. What is third wave anti-racism? Came out in the Atlantic in December of 2018, and he talks about we had the Civil War that got rid of that got rid of slavery. We had the Civil Rights Movement, which got rid of black and white only drinking fountains and people not being able to get hotel rooms and people not being able to buy houses or get a job or something. We got rid of that. What is the third wave? And he says, it's really kind of ill-defined. What are we after? But my point being that silence equals violence demands that you assume that there is very prevalent and heavily imposed systemic racism going on in our society now. And if you take exception to that, you're no longer excluded. You're here, sit down over here and be quiet. We're going to get your mind right.
Yeah. I posted this on our Facebook page yesterday, and I posted, I take great exception to the phrase silence is violence. What this phrase does is allows people to assume the ideology, values, and lived experience of someone else so that they can justify their use of actual violence against that person. That is oppression.
Did you come up with that, Clyde?
Yes, I did. I came up with...
That's very, very well put.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that, saying silence is violence is an excuse for the left or other people to use actual violence against other people. I'm certainly not the first person to come up with that idea or say those words. But yeah, I put that string of words together. So I'll take credit for that at least. But that's what it is. They need a way to give the go-ahead to use actual violence against people who aren't using actual violence. To say that an ideology, for you to just think something, or for them to even be able to assume what you're thinking, is a justifiable reason for them to use actual violence against you. And I think that that is the largest indicator, again, that we are on the precipice of severely losing everything that it means to be free in the United States.
I agree. Another thing I just sent you, and we'll have to put it up as the background reference material for our viewers, is a piece, a recent piece, June 28th, by Matt Taibbi at his Substack page. It's on the new book by Robin DiAngelo called White Fragility.
Oh, yeah, I've been reading to get to this book.
Yeah, Matt Taibbi is an interesting case. He's the son of an NBC News reporter. I forget where he went to school, but afterwards he spent some time in Mongolia as a professional basketball player, and in Uzbekistan as a professional baseball player. Maybe I've got those reversed. But then he started getting into investigative journalism. He's done stints as a staff member at the one of the smaller New York newspapers, and also at Rolling Stone magazine. But he's at this point he's a freelancer, and you can't peg him. I mean, he mostly comes from a progressive viewpoint, from a left-leaning viewpoint, but he can be pretty iconoclastic. And he says of this book, it's been mind-boggling to watch white fragility celebrated in recent weeks. Have the people hyping this impressively crazy book actually read it? DiAngelo isn't the first person to make a buck pushing tricked-up pseudo-intellectual horseshit as corporate wisdom, but he might be the first to do it selling Hitlerian race theory. White fragility has a simple message. There is no such thing as a universal human experience, and we are defined not by our individual personalities or moral choices, but by our racial category. If your category is white, Bad news. You have no identity apart from your participation in white supremacy. Anti-blackness is foundational to our very identities. Whiteness has always been predicated on blackness.
Oh, fuck you.
Yeah, I know.
You know what? So, I'm in the wrong business.
I'm really proud of Taibbi for he probably caught some opprobrium from fellow lefties for this.
I'm sure they'll eat him.
Yeah.
But I'm in the wrong business, man. The real money seems to be in white people telling other white people what shit garbage other white people are, or all white people are.
Yeah, there's an industry that it can be quite lucrative.
I read the summary of this book, and it was basically just that if a white person stands up for themselves and defends their individuality or defends their non-culpability in slavery or Jim Crow or oppression, then that person is white and fragile. That person's emotionally fragile. And I think that's just, I don't know. It's so stupid. It's hard to entertain it for very long. But I would like to read the entire book so that I'm sure I know what I'm talking about.
Well, and now along those lines, I think we ought to make mention of a piece you sent, alerted me to. Once again, the Indianapolis area, Carmel, which is a suburb on the north side of Indianapolis, a Carmel priest was recently suspended he was pretty harsh here. He called Black Lives Matter protesters maggots and parasites, at best feeding off the isolation of addiction and broken families. The Diocese of Lafayette, Indiana, suspended him, and the whole thing's pretty interesting. You alerted me to this. What did you take away from the whole?
You know what? I'm surprised. I felt it necessary to send this link to you because I couldn't give a damn less about the story. I think it's funny, or well, not funny, but it's an interesting story to some regard because this guy said something intentionally provocative.
Yeah. And
he got a repercussion. And if his employer wants to sever ties with him over it, I guess that's fine. It's a private entity. The church is a non-governmental agency. So if they want to suspend him or get rid of him over this, I think that's fine. But I also think that there's no way that this person of the cloth. Let me retract that. I find it unlikely that this person of the cloth who believes that you have to be generous and giving to people, that you have to follow in the footsteps of Christ, believes that black lives don't matter. I find that very hard to believe. What I think this person is saying is that the protesters, not the protesters, but the people who took the opportunity to loot stores and injure people and damage property and cause chaos, that those people are maggots and degenerates and whatever else he said. I really believe that's what he was referring to. And I don't think that it's very hard to look at this situation and at least assume that at first. So maybe his employers did a deeper dive on it and found out that that wasn't the case and that he's a bigoted son of a bitch. I don't know. But I doubt it.
Well, and for a few episodes now, we've been talking about the fact that the phrase Black Lives Matter elicits kind of a well, duh type response. Of course, Black Lives Matter. Who's saying they don't? But it's a very innocuous phrase in and of itself. But it's the name of a formal organization that was founded by 3 women back in 2013 who had what they wanted it to be was far larger in scope and was full of intersectional identity politics. Haven't got into trans stuff and queer stuff and so forth, and obliteration of the nuclear family. And we talked about how what an interesting goal that is for
Mm-hmm.
that organization to have, given that non-nuclear families is one of Black America's biggest problems. But anyway, so it may well be that he was talking about, but that's back to the overall theme of this segment: matching words and meaning. I'm a communicator by profession. Is supremely important. Getting things right, terming things accurately is so important for having truth prevail in our world. And Black Lives Matter is an organization with a set of platforms that are very radical and are anything but conducive to freedom.
And I think
I think there's a very good chance he was referring to that.
I think it warrants a whole show to talk about the difference between Black Lives Matter, the phrase, and Black Lives Matter, the organization, and the people, the rank and file within that organization. But it's going to take us down a rabbit hole now, so we should get to that next time. But here's something I want to say about: is it Father Rothrock? Is that the right term, Father?
Yeah, he's
a Catholic, right? So they said. They were saying that this was white supremacist rhetoric, that this guy was spouting white supremacy to churchgoers. And I just think that is just such horseshit garbage. If this person is a Catholic, right? So I think it's pretty safe to assume he's pro-life. Am I right?
Yeah.
So I read somewhere that between 28 and 40% of Black pregnancies end in abortion, not live births. So that's like 200,000 to 250,000 babies a year. Yeah. This person wants there to be 250,000 more Black people per year. How is that a white supremacist? How do you make a white supremacist out of somebody who wants for there to be 200 plus more thousand Black people born every year? I find that absurd. But I don't know this. I don't know this guy, and I'm not going to go out on a limb for him personally. I find it very hard to believe that he's an overt white supremacist, considering the facts.
Right. No. And if you look at his actual piece that got him in so much trouble, he's talking about this does not help the poor in the communities that Black Lives Matter claims to be so concerned about.
Yeah, destroying their bus routes and the stores that they shop at, and that really helps poor people. We should move on.
Okay. We've pretty well dealt with that segment. So let's move on to they really said that.
This is gonna be fun.
Our president, the very stable genius, is always good for some content for this segment. Why don't you start with the Eagle Force thing that you wanted to talk about?
Okay, so there's a couple different things here where Trump has put out the Trump team has put out a few different things and sort of branding and design elements that people have called into question. And I've got two specific examples, one stupid and one evil.
Okay.
So the first one is stupid. What we're looking at is the United States Space Force logo against the logo for the Starfleet Command logo from Star Trek. So they're both very, very similar. And what you have, for those of you who are listening to the audio version of the podcast and not able to view it on YouTube here, what we have is a logo that's a circle within a circle in both cases, the Space Force logo and the Starfleet Command logo, a circle within a circle logo. And around the outer circle is the organization and the sub-organization. So we have the United States of America, or the United States Space Force at the top, and the bottom of that is the Department of the Air Force. And on the Starfleet Command from Star Trek logo, exactly in the same amount of spacing at the top, you have the Starfleet Command branding at the top, and around the bottom part of the outer circle it says United Federation of Planets. So those are perfectly, almost perfectly identical to each other. The U.S. Space Force logo is white text on dark blue background. The Starfleet Command one is dark blue text on a mostly white background. Okay, and in the center circle, you have almost identical graphics. You have the Starfleet Command insignia that you remember from the old Star Trek original series shirt insignias, where there's a sort of a almost triangular sort of spaceship looking situation, and there's a triangular it's a semi-triangle spaceship pointing upward, and it has the sort of Nike swoosh going around it, sort of like the orbital plane. So it's an off-axis orbital plane encircling the spaceship or the triangle in the center. There's such almost identical logos that it's hard to believe that that's an accident. Okay, so here we go to the evil one. We've got the Nazi eagle clutching the Swastika insignia. Okay, so it's a very common symbol for Nazi Germany, this eagle, and it's facing right, and its wings are spread, and they're very precise and linear, sort of like a warbird type of airplane. And you can see that the wreath below it with the swastika has some things that sort of indicate aircraft in that wreath. And then here you have the T-shirt for Trump 2020. It says America First at the top, but it has the eagle. It's facing the same direction. The profile glance is facing the same direction as the Nazi eagle. The wings are spread in much the same way, and it's clutching the circle at the bottom. And in both cases, there's an insignia inside the circle. In the case of the Nazi eagle, obviously it's a swastika. In the case of the Trump T-shirt, it's an American flag. So, these things are so similar that it's really hard to think that that's completely coincidental. There's a lot of symbolism in the United States. Obviously, our logo is also an eagle, right? The Great Seal of the United States symbol is an eagle. And the eagle in the Trump shirt is much more American than is the Nazi eagle. If you look here, I've got a picture showing here of a United States quarter, the original quarter, not the state quarter. So it still had the eagle on the front side of it. And the American eagle insignias, they have a much more rounded wings, sort of more in that angel shape, the classical painting sort of angel shaped wings, where they've got really, really tall crests, and the crests of the wings are above the head of the eagle. And then if you look at the Great Seals of the United States, as they've sort of evolved over time, you can see that in a lot of cases, the eagle faces the other direction from both the Nazi symbol and the Trump logo. But in some cases, it does face the same way as both. But in most cases, it seems not to, as it evolves over time. But always the feathers are much less linear and cut, and they're usually more flowing and more rounded corners. But I gotta say, like I said before, it's really hard to view these two things and think that they're not related.
And the question immediately rises: who within the graphic design department or whatever that comes up with such things either did not notice that or fully intended it? Yeah.
That's my question, because here's the thing. I don't know what's in Donald Trump's mind. I don't pretend to know, and I don't really want to know.
There's not a whole lot in it.
Yeah. If there's a space I don't want to go into, it's that one.
Okay.
But one thing I'm pretty sure of is that he's not sitting around drawing designs and making vector graphics and coming up with their branding.
Yeah.
Now, he may have handpicked the person who does, or that person may be a carryover from another administration, or maybe somebody that they've hired, or maybe they're just outsourcing it to Fiverr or freelancer.com like everyone else does, and someone's just trolling the hell out of them. And that would be hilarious if that were the case.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to say a few words about the speech at the White House last night. Donald Trump is among other things, a very bombastic individual, and as the tensions of 2020, coronavirus and the economic collapse and the civil unrest and all the things that have been going on, his bombast has been put to pretty cringe-inducing use, like when he talked about vicious dogs and ominous weapons and all that kind of thing. But last night, I thought he struck a pretty decent tone in the part when he talked about basic American values. He was good, and you could tell he was reading from a script that was written by somebody else. You can always tell when he's getting off script.
Yeah.
And that part was carefully crafted, and he stuck to it. And he was. I was even okay when he got a little bit in your face. The tone got a little bit in your face when he was talking about the radical statute topplers and how they intend to erase our history and destroy the American experiment, and how we will not let them intimidate us. It actually, though, kind of rings a little hollow. I mean, he's talking about, we will not let these people topple statues. Well, President VSG, that horse is already out of the barn.
Right.
That ship's already sailed. A lot of statues have already come down, pal. Which kind of weakens, kind of diminishes the stance of resolve he was looking for. But then he started getting into policy specifics and beginning with defending tariffs, and he lost me for quite a while once he started into that protectionist garbage. And he got into some bragging, of course. By the end of the speech, he was getting back to the lofty themes, and that was okay. You can tell, though, that what the whole thing was, it was crafted to give him a theme to run on for the rest of this presidential campaign. And he's serving notice that he's a resolute guy, that I know what the big problem is, and it's the statues coming down and what that represents. And I don't disagree. And I've said before on this program that he's got this cyclical pattern of doing one thing that's pretty good and then following it with two or three that absolutely ruin it. And we'll just see how long it is before he...
Here's why Trump is a winner. Despite maybe not deserving to be, or not having the best policy necessarily, whether you like Trump or don't, I don't really care. But here's why he keeps winning. He's cultivating. I remember I listen to the Joe Rogan podcast a lot, and he's talking to different comedians all the time, and they're always talking about how they craft their bit. Like they're going to do a Netflix bit or a Netflix show, right? It's like an hour and a half long comedy presentation, and they spend a year or more touring small clubs and practicing and showing up for surprise appearances at the Comedy Cellar or whatever, and they just show up and do a quick show, and each time they're crafting what gets a laugh, what doesn't, what tweak of one word here, one word there, one phrase here, one phrase there, which one of those things really changes the dynamic of the joke. And then by the time they've done that for a year, they've got a whole list of proven material that kills, right? Mm-hmm. And people are talking about Trump going around and giving all these dud speeches. Some of it was good, but a lot of it was, blah and back and forth. And it's like, well, he's crafting. He's about to go into debates. He's about to go into bigger town halls. He's about to start addressing the people in much more advertising. So he's crafting the message right now. And because he doesn't have a set of core principles other than, win.
His own glorification.
Well, his own glorification and to be a populist. You know what I mean? I think honestly, he does want to give a lot of Americans what they want. Maybe not all Americans.
Yeah.
But he does want to give a lot of Americans what they want, and he wants to tell them what they want to hear. So in order to tell them that, he's got to find out what they want to hear. So he's crafting his hour-long Netflix special. Not that they'd give him one.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
And he's going to deliver, by the time it's November, he's going to deliver a crushing, crafted speech. Because he's a TV guy. He knows how to do this.
Yeah.
He's in his home court here.
Yeah. I can see what you're saying. Do you really feel he's cultivated that art that well? I mean, his track record for consistency is not the greatest. That's
why it's not consistent, is because he's willing. He doesn't have a set of core guiding principles. He tells people what they want to hear. And right now he's finding out what that is. He's finding out which issues, and to the public, he can say contradictory things to the public, and that's fine. It's just like the left. We were talking about the left can say that a person who's pro-life is also a white supremacist when those two things are completely incompatible. But it sounds absolutely reasonable to them. Well, the same thing goes for Trump. He can say two things that conflict logic, but to the population, they don't. As long as he gets the big chair, doesn't matter that they're ideologically opposed to one another.
Yeah, he's just making note of which lines land.
Which ones land, exactly.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
Exactly right.
Okay. I think free marketeers that we both are, we both found this interesting. The Washington Post ran a piece by one of its writers, Tracy Jan, here. This is a segment we often do. Maybe someday we'll try a free market. Not if it's up to people like Tracy Jan, but she's just completely baffled that after a half century of progressive economic policies, there's more inequality than ever in Minneapolis. Why, after decades of progressive leadership, is there still so much inequality? Taxes for decades have been redistributed from wealthy suburbs to poorer communities to combat inequality, an effort bolstered in recent years by raising state income taxes on the rich. The result, more money for schools, affordable housing, and social services in lower income neighborhoods. But the prosperity fueled by the region's Fortune 500 companies and progressive policies has not translated into economic equality. Instead, the wealth gap between Minneapolis' largely white population and the city's black residents has deepened, producing some of the nation's widest racial disparities in income, employment, and home ownership. The typical black family in the Twin Cities earns $39,851 in 2017, lower than the median income for African Americans nationally, and less than half as much for a typical white family income of $82,371. Economists, lawyers, and civil rights activists, advocates in the Twin Cities say the progressive tax policies could not make up for other aspects of structural racism, such as access to credit or jobs. Some say investments in affordable housing in low-income neighborhoods deepen segregation and poverty. She doesn't bother to consider that this is, redistribution just doesn't work, and that states without progressive control, think maybe like Utah, Alaska, and Iowa, have far less inequality. She does kind of act like she might get that. She says, in addition to investing in home ownership programs, Minnesota has created financial incentives for the construction of affordable housing that critics say will end up exacerbating segregation. Each year, tens of millions in local and federal subsidies are directed toward poor Black, Latino, and Southeast Asian neighborhoods in the Twin Cities. Distribution doesn't create more wealth.
Right.
Yeah, is the basic thing she doesn't want to see.
Yeah. Again, I'm not really sure how you solve these problems. So I know you don't solve it just by throwing all the spaghetti against the wall and hoping some sticks. But I think at this point you can say that at least on this municipality level, that these progressive policies don't work. Almost all of these progressive cities are in shambles, at least as far as the impoverished communities are concerned. Even if they, like San Francisco and cities like that, they may have a very wealthy sector. They may have a lot of wealth generation, but using that wealth and redirecting that wealth has not resulted, in half a century, has not resulted in lifting up the lower class.
You would think that a lesson would start to be learned here.
You would think.
Yeah.
And the housing thing gets me because, I mean, I get the reason why people would want to create these housing subsidies and low cost housing and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at it, you kind of are just funneling people into, you're giving people incentives to segregate, basically.
Yeah.
They have to go, they're going to go to where this lower income, rather than make incentives to bring the prices down over the entire community, bringing down property taxes, improving the services in those areas, rather than make it cheaper to live elsewhere. Let entrepreneurs figure it out and provide low-cost housing that's not subsidized by the government. Let them figure out how to do it in an actually affordable manner, rather than just giving half or two-thirds of the bill to the government, or all of it.
Yeah, old Uncle Barnes' fundamental law of economics: a good or service is what buyer and seller agree that it's worth. And if you go injecting any other party into that agreement, it distorts the agreement that they've come up with. And
yeah.
Certainly if that other party is government. Now, then the counter argument to that is, well, but the historically disadvantaged people that haven't had the education, that gets us into a whole range of cultural questions. And yeah.
And I think that again, it's often government that's distorting the prices in the neighborhoods that they want to be more approachable by minorities, right? Again,
yes.
High property taxes, and those go higher and higher the more they try to create services. So if you're wanting to redistribute the wealth, the science always is, or the method always is, you hose the rich, right? Okay, that's fine. Take money from the rich. But when they do that, then the rich have to pay more in taxes, which means the places where they live will be reserved for the more wealthy, who can all take that impact of the chunk that's being taken out of them. So you make these wealthy neighborhoods less approachable.
Yes. And
then you subsidize this housing, and you push people into this into the cheapest possible housing, and they don't talk about wealth generation. They talk about a wealth gap, right? But what they're doing, everything that they do in progressive policies, it's almost as it's designed to widen the gap.
Mm-hmm.
You would think a lesson would be learned.
Just want to make note, we did sort of have another segment at Don't Start Me to Talkin', which I think we've done before. It's the name of an old Sonny Boy Williamson song. But I just wanted to make note of the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell, and I think I'm mispronouncing her first name, but the wealthy socialite who has a breadth of connection in the worlds of business and finance and British royalty and all kinds of things, and politics. It's pretty amazing. She's sitting. She was FBI arrested her at her New Hampshire estate the other morning, and she's in a county jail there in New Hampshire under very close guard because lawyers for the survivors of the sex ring that she and Jeffrey Epstein were operating feel that it's imperative that she be kept alive and compelled to spill the beans.
I would have to agree.
The chips are going to fall in all kinds of places. Let's all prepare ourselves for that.
I can't wait to see this story
have a vested
unfold.
interest in this or that political party or candidate or whatever, or historical figure, people that in the world of business, the chips are going to fall where they do, and it's going to be earth-shaking.
I can't wait to see the whole thing unfold. I don't know where it's going to go, but I mean, so many people seem to have their, their fingers in this situation, and
I'm just going to leave this right here, that there are a whole lot of pictures out on the internet of her in the company of Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. And the Clintons.
And the Clintons, true, no doubt.
So nothing would please me more than having the Republican Party and the Democratic Party both just shaken to their core. Just, just take the rug outside and just shake it. You know what I mean? And just get all the dirt and crud and shit out of it,
Yeah.
And maybe there's still something left behind. Hopefully there's a few left standing. Maybe there's a new political party. Maybe they just clean up these two. I don't care, but there are horrible people committing horrible atrocities in both of them, clearly. It's sort of that old George Carlin thing. It's an exclusive club, and you ain't in it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, listen, long-timers know this, but if you've just joined us, you know that we do this fortnightly and forthrightly. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode, and we'll expect to see you pull a stool up to the libation station, pour yourself something bracing, and join us for another look at weighty matters on the nation's plate.
Absolutely, and I want you to do me a favor, all of you out there. I want you to click the subscribe button. You can always unsubscribe if you're not getting the value that we think we're delivering. But hit that subscribe button. Let's build this following a little bit more. It's been increasing, but we want to increase it faster. We want to get out to more people. We want to be able to provide this commentary to as many people as possible. And we want as many people as possible to be able to participate in it. So comment below. Send us an email to barneyandclydeshow@gmail.com. Send us hate mail, send us praise mail, send us whatever's on your mind. Again, I said this a couple times the last few fortnights. Send us video clips, send us audio clips. If you want to be on the show to talk about something that's on your mind, let me or Barney know, or send a private message to our Facebook page, our Gmail, or just comment below in the YouTube comment section, and we will definitely talk to you and see what we can do. So please subscribe to us on your favorite audio only podcast manager, Apple, Google, Spotify. All the major podcast apps carry us. So subscribe to those services, subscribe to our podcast on those services, and rate us. I'd rather have a 2 or 3 star honest review. I'd rather have you tell me first, before you rate us a 2-star or a 1-star, how we could get to a 5 in your opinion.
Yeah.
And see if we can make that change. But just let us know what you're thinking and how we can do this better. And we would love, love, love to hear from you.
And also, stop by my blog late in the day, where I post pretty much daily, sometimes more than once a day. And I have a Substack newsletter I call Precipice, and I post there every few days, and subscribe to either of those too as well. So, and if you're a meme creating machine, make your memes and send them our way, and we'll post them, and we'll give credit where credit is due. We'll share your memes from your page, or we'll credit your name, or whatever it takes. So just send us all the content you think we would get value and interest out of. And in the meantime, stay vigilant about your freedom.
Well, that's an interesting development.